Hello everyone! Today is an exciting day because Arch Tempered Uth Duna is here along with a bunch of new gear, and if it's anything like the gear we got from Arch Tempered Uth, we are going to have some absolutely insane builds that we can make. So without further ado, let's get straight into the gear, the set bonuses, the extremely powerful builds of which will be much variety, and everything else. So getting straight into the gear here, we can see that the skills on the set are very similar to the original Uth Duna set in that it is focused around peak performance and tool specialist, which is to be expected, and while these are great skills in a vacuum, there are a lot of better skills in the game that you would usually want to use instead. Because of this, it is already going to be very hard for the Arch Tempered Uth Duna set to compete in the meta. But if we dive a bit deeper here, we can see that the helm has 2 points of peak performance, 1 point of earplugs, as well as a level 3 and a level 2 slot. When directly comparing this to the Arch Tempered Uth helm, we can see that it is significantly worse because the Arch Tempered Uth helm just has significantly better skills. It has Weakness Exploit, Maximum Might, and a level 3 slot. These are skills that peak performance just cannot compete with in the current state of the game, and unfortunately this theme continues for most of the remaining set. The chest is worse because it has no slots, essentially locking you into using peak performance and earplugs, which is always going to be worse than using something like 3 latent power and a slot. Moving on to the arms though, this is where things get a bit better. We have 3 points of Tool Specialist as well as a point of Agitator and a level 2 slot. This is actually quite skill efficient and perhaps a good way to get some Tool Specialist in your build if that's something you really want. However, Tool Specialist isn't a skill that is usually too sought after, because why would you trade out some damage skills that could potentially be active all of the time, just to slightly reduce the cooldown of a mantle that is hardly ever available to begin with? You can of course disagree with me on that stance, and if you do, I'd love to hear more about it in the comments down below, but that is how I see Tool Specialist. Getting onto the waist, it is basically in the same boat as the arms, meaning that it has room to fit in some points of the most powerful skills in the game, while also giving you some tool specialist. But not as many as you would have if you just chose to use one of the better armor pieces instead. But the legs though, these are hands down one of the best pairs of legs in the entire game. They have max quick sheath, which is absolutely a requirement for longsword, and a very nice quality of life improvement for just about every other weapon. It also has a point of Agitator, which is one of the best offensive skills in the game, and on top of that it also has a level 3 and 2 level 1 slots. There's really not much else to say about these other than you should definitely make these first. Now I know I did just kind of rip on the armor quite a bit for mainly providing a pretty bad offensive skill, but there are some other really good redeemable qualities here other than the amazing pair of legs, and we will find those in the set bonuses. Funnily enough, the best set bonus is actually the group skill bonus Lord Soul, which is also found on the Arch Tempered Uth gear. Also, with it being a group skill bonus, you can of course mix them together to get Lord Soul more efficiently, which is something we will definitely be doing. If you're not familiar with Lord Soul, all you really need to know about it is that it gives you 5% more raw damage. It's not that black and white, but the rest of the ins and outs don't really matter, if we're being honest, so I'll save you the explanation. As for the other set bonus skill here, we have Protective Veil, which provides you 25 defense at level 1 or 50 defense and 12 resistance at level 2, after using a mantle. This one is a little bit interesting because while this is primarily a defensive skill, which is normally not that interesting, the laggy Acris weapons exist, and those do more damage based on your thunder resistance, so this could in theory be an offensive skill. But after actually testing that out, I realized that the Uth Duna armor has such bad thunder resistance to start with that they essentially end up cancelling each other out. So that's not really a thing. However, the defense increase can still be a nice addition to a defensive build or even an immortal build. Other than the actual armor, Uth Duna also gave us upgraded versions of the peak performance and tool specialist charms, so they go to 3 and 4 respectively now. However, these are still not very desirable skills, and even if you actually wanted those skills, I'm sure it would be more efficient to just obtain them through armor or decos instead of the charms. So definitely don't bother getting these unless you just want to collect everything. Right, so moving on to the actual builds then. First up we are going to have a comfort build, which despite being a comfort build still does an absolute ton of damage and is not to be slept on. It has a ton of the offensive skills you want, primarily Agitator, Latent Power, Counter Strike, Maximum Might, and Lord Soul, which will see that you are doing a ton of damage. But this build also has Tool Specialist, Divine Blessing, Earplugs, Protective Veil, and Zoshia's Super Recovery. which will provide you with a ton of defense and survivability for those much more difficult hunts. Plus, you're getting all of that survivability on a build that only does about 5% less damage than a max DPS set. Speaking of percentages, let's get into the actual math behind the set. The Ardian Greatsword has 225 raw, and Lord Soul gives us 5% more, which brings us to 236. But we also have to remember that Agitator, Counter-Strike, and Burst are giving us a bunch of attack as well. After adding all of that up, our new total becomes 291. When taking into account our White Sharpness modifier of 1.32x, that number becomes 384.1. Then finally factoring in our Critical Boost 5 and 80% affinity, lands us at a whopping 507 effective raw, which is an absolute ton of damage for a build that has this much comfort. Next up, we have a max latent power build that is ideal for longer hunts against the harder hitting monsters such as Arch Tempered Uth Duna itself. This build can even potentially outperform the max DPS set that I will be covering next, provided you can actually keep latent power active for a large enough portion of the quest. To assist with making sure that happens, I have also made sure to include Thunderous Roar 2 in this build as well, which will extend the duration of latent power by 90 seconds, bringing its total activation time up to 3.5 minutes. Looking at the math behind this set, we again have 225 base attack on our Greatsword, increased by 5% for Lord Soul, bringing us to 236. Adding up Agitator and Counter-Strike then brings us to 281. Multiplying that by our wonderful White Sharpness then brings us to 370.9. But we also have Critical Boost 5, and with our 100% affinity, that means a total of 519 effective raw. Now moving on to the build I'm sure everyone's been waiting for, the max DPS set. This set is honestly pretty crazy because it basically has everything. You got your Agitator, your Latent Power, Counter-Strike, there's a ton of free 1 slots for you to slot in Thunder Resistance to boost up the damage of your laggy Acris Greatsword if you're using that. And the list just keeps going on and on. Quick Sheath is extremely comfortable on Greatsword. We got Evade Extender, Weakness Exploit, Burst, not to mention the set bonuses which are also extremely stacked. We have Lord Soul for even more damage, Azure Bolt for even more affinity, and to top it all off, we also have Thunderous Roar, which is going to increase our latent power uptime as well. I really think this is the pinnacle of Greatsword builds, at least at this current point in time. As for the math behind this set, we have our Ardian Greatsword with 225 attack, with the Lord Soul giving 5% more raw, bringing us to 236. We also get a bunch of raw from Agitator, Counter-Strike, and Burst, which brings us up to 291. Multiply that by our White Sharpness, and we end up with 384.1. Then we take our Critical Boost 5 and our 96% affinity, which ends up giving us another 1.384 times multiplier, bringing our effective raw up to a staggering 531.6 in total, which is just insane. We covered the builds, but what about the weapons? Those are equally as important, and not everyone has a perfect Ardian. If you have found yourself in that position, then I'd highly recommend that you make the laggy Acris Greatsword, as it can reach very similar numbers to a perfect Ardian, thanks to the 2 built-in points of focus. So there you have it, those are the best builds and weapons you should be using post Arch Tempered Uth Duna. But if you enjoyed this video, you're definitely going to want to subscribe because I will be doing my absolute best to cover all 14 of the weapons in the game this time around. Also, while you're down there clicking the subscribe button, make sure to join my Discord server as well, because that is where you will find updated versions of these builds if I ever find a way to make them even better. But with that said, I will see you in the next video.